This is the story of Mamadu Yarrow, known to many as Yarrow Mamut. He was brought to America as a slave and, despite unimaginable hardships, remained a devout Muslim throughout his life. His journey is one of resilience and triumph, captured in a portrait painted in 1819 by Charles Wilson Peele. Peele, a renowned artist of the Revolutionary War era, was famous for his works depicting iconic figures like George Washington. But in Yarrow's portrait, Peele captured something truly extraordinary: the indomitable spirit of a forgotten pioneer.
This man who painted presidents decided he wanted to paint a picture of Yarrow.
To pay that kind of attention to a formerly enslaved Black man, this is unheard of.
When I first heard about an enslaved Muslim or an emancipated Muslim, I was like, what do you mean? Like, I didn't think that, Muslims were in the US until later.
Even though we have a lot of evidence, the story of the African Muslims in the United States has been, for the longest time, lost, unknown.
I didn't really even know about the story when I was growing up here as an adult.
This is a story that predates the founding of America.
Predates the founding of America.
Mamadu Yarrow's story unfolds in Washington, D.C., where much of his later life played out. In the heart of this bustling city, which was still taking shape at the time, Yarrow carved out a unique legacy. As a Muslim born in West Africa, his faith played a central role in his identity. Yarrow's story provides a rare glimpse into the lives of early African Muslims in America, a group whose contributions have often been overlooked.
It appears as if between 10 to 15%, some say even 30% of the enslaved Africans came from Muslim parts of West Africa.
Thousands of Muslims were enslaved in the Americas, including what became the United States.
They were part of the social and cultural and economic development of the Americas for half a millennium.
History tells us that African Muslims like Yarrow left traces of their presence in unexpected places: plantation records, ads for runaway slaves, and even personal writings. But Yarrow stands apart. He was not only documented in records, but also immortalized in art, painted not once, but twice. This rare distinction set him apart and ensured that his story would not fade into obscurity.
He gives us a story of what it was like to gain freedom and then live after that and practice as a free person. I don't think we have any other story like that.
Yarrow's life is preserved in the archives of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia. It is through the writings of Charles Wilson Peele that we gain insight into this extraordinary man. Peele, whose works included portraits of George Washington, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, devoted time to capture the essence of Yarrow, recognizing his significance.
We are looking at one of 26 diaries written by Charles Wilson Peele, a very important early American portrait painter, one of the most important. This diary goes back to 1818 to early 1819. The diary is rather small, as you can see. It's about 58 pages of text. The Yarrow section takes up about 3.5 pages. It's the biggest vignette in the diary from this period.
In December 1818, Peele recorded a visit to Georgetown, where he encountered Yarrow. At the time, Yarrow was an elderly man living under remarkable circumstances.
Mr. Brewer said that he is comfortable in his situation, having bank stock, and lives in his own house. I
shall be able to give a more particular account of him as I propose to make a portrait of him, should I have the opportunity of doing it.
Intrigued by his story, Peele chronicled their meeting in his diary, which would later prove crucial in piecing together Yarrow's life.
I was here at this library many years ago, and I saw this painting by James Alexander Simpson. Georgetown is a lily white community, and so to see a painting of a Black man at this library was sort of unusual. That's what started the whole project.
Where did Yarrow come from exactly?
We don't know for sure, but he was a Fulani Muslim, and the Fulani were moving from Mali into Senegal, Guinea, and other places in West Africa at the time.
Islam comes to Africa itself via the trans-Saharan trade routes and over North Africa down into West Africa.
Islam was implanted in Africa for over 1,000 years. The spread of Islam went hand in hand with the spread of literacy in Arabic. So there were schools for boys and girls. There were also institutions of higher learning, and they traveled all over, not only West Africa, but to Mecca, to Egypt, to learn.
They also are interested in not necessarily being Arab, as it were, but practicing Islam through this African sensibility.
Mamadu Yarrow's world began in West Africa, where he spent his childhood in freedom. But in the mid-1700s, his life took a tragic turn. Around 1750, Yarrow and his sister were captured during a local conflict and sold to British slave traders. This marked the beginning of a harrowing journey that would forever alter his destiny.
He's in a center of Islamic learning, and then boom, just like that, he becomes a captive of the slave trade. And he becomes one of the estimated 12.5 million people that from 1525 to about 1867 were taken from Africa to the New World.
Yarrow and his sister endured the grueling Middle Passage, a months-long voyage across the Atlantic aboard the ship Elijah. In the summer of 1752, the ship arrived in Annapolis, Maryland, where Yarrow and his sister were advertised in a local newspaper and sold as property. They were separated upon arrival, and the fate of Yarrow's sister remains unknown.
This is a page from the Maryland Gazette, a weekly newspaper published in those days.
So it says, just imported in the Elijah, directly from the coast of Africa.
A parcel of healthy slaves consisting of men, women, and children. So they're bringing children over as well.
And it will be,
disposed of on board the said vessel.
For sterling money, bills of exchange, gold or paper currency.
Yarrow was sent to a tobacco plantation in Montgomery County, Maryland, where he spent decades enslaved. Despite the brutal conditions, Yarrow maintained a connection to his roots and faith. Historical records suggest that during this time, he had a son with an enslaved woman. Life on the plantation was grueling, but Yarrow's resilience carried him through. Around 1790, Yarrow's life took a dramatic turn. His enslaver moved him to Georgetown, a modest port town along the Potomac River that would later become one of Washington, D.C.'s most exclusive neighborhoods. In Yarrow's time, however, it was a bustling hub of commerce and community where he would begin the next chapter of his journey.
How does he end up in Georgetown?
He was purchased by one of Georgetown's most famous families, the Beale or Bells, Samuel initially, who makes him his manservant, or might be a fancy name for a valet.
I think he was smart enough to learn how to be around his enslaver. It's different if you're a field hand or you're in sort of doing other kinds of chores. That may have even helped to preserve him from not being broken down in certain kinds of ways as others are.
In order to make money, the Bells or Beals like for him to be industrious. They also require that he give whatever he makes to them, but they give some of the money back.
And so what type of work was Yarrow doing?
He made charcoal. He had that technique. He sold baskets. He also made bricks. He commanded 1.5 times what a white brick maker could.
In Georgetown, Yarrow became part of a growing Black community composed of both enslaved and free individuals. Many from this community, along with their descendants, are now laid to rest at Mount Zion Cemetery, established in the early 1800s. This vibrant community offered Yarrow a sense of belonging and support during his transition from enslavement to freedom.
This graveyard gives us a glimpse into the type of community Yarrow was entering.
Yeah, we don't want you to look at him in isolation. We want you to understand that there were people, a community of which he was part, that shared the same kinds of goals.
And most of these would have been Black men, women, children
Black
who
men,
lived.
and we have some who may have perhaps even known Yarrow, or certainly they knew of the kind of existence that he was living because they had lived it.
And Yarrow himself, though, is not buried here.
He is not
right?
buried
He was
here.
buried
As far
in
as we know, he is buried in his backyard. Haven't found him yet,
Yeah.
but we hope to one day if he is there.
During the early 1790s, Yarrow worked for Brooke, the son of his enslaver. As the newly formed United States began to take shape, Yarrow saved what little he could, determined to secure his freedom. His diligence and perseverance paid off when he eventually purchased a plot of land on the outskirts of Georgetown, now known as Dent Place, Northwest.
When Charles Wilson Peele came to paint his portrait in 1819, he was so intrigued by Yarrow's story that he went to Margaret Beale, Brooke Beale's widow. She told him it was true.
Early in the morning, went to see some of the family who had knowledge of him for many years, whose ancestors had purchased him from the ship that brought him from Africa. The widow Bell told me that Yarrow was always an industrious, hard-working man and had served them faithfully for many years. And her husband, intending to build a large house in Georgetown, told Yarrow if he would be very industrious in making the bricks for that house, that when he made all the bricks, that he would set him free.
So he obtained his freedom by essentially agreeing to make bricks.
The man who had contracted the promise died and before he got his freedom. But his wife was able, understanding what her husband's desire was, carried through with it.
The widow told Yarrow that as he had performed his duty, that she had made the necessary papers to set him free, and now he was made free.
So Yarrow becomes a free man in August of 1796?
That's correct.
And he would have been what age at this point?
He was 60 years old.
60 years old, he becomes a free
you're a slave
man.
until you're 60. And his life started anew then.
After Yarrow obtained his freedom, he worked hard and saved his money until he got $100, which he put into an old gentleman's hand to keep for him. That person died, and Yarrow lost his money. However, he still worked as before and raised another $100, which he put into the care of a young merchant in Georgetown. But this merchant became a bankrupt. Yet not dispirited, he worked hard and saved a third sum, amounting to $200. Some friend of Yarrow advised him to buy bank stock in the Columbia Bank, and he was amongst the first who contributed to that bank.
This was a monumental achievement. Yarrow, who had once arrived in America aboard a slave ship, had become a landowner. His acquisition of property marked him as one of the first black individuals in the D.C. area to own land in his own name. In a time when such opportunities were exceedingly rare, Yarrow's accomplishment was nothing short of extraordinary.
This is the Recorder of Deeds ledger book from 1800 in Washington, D.C. It's a very old book, and it's all in this beautiful script. And this is his deed of Yarrow's house.
10th day of January, 1800. Wow, okay. And do you see Yarrow's name here? Oh, here it is. You see his name.
Yes.
Yarrow.
And it gives him a half lot in Georgetown. That was a piece of property 35 feet wide and 150 feet deep. So it was a big piece of property.
What did having this land allow him to do personally?
He brought his son in to live with him, brought his wife in to live with him.
So he was able to have a family in a way that so many slaves were often separated from their families. That's correct. Families were broken apart.
In Georgetown, Yarrow earned recognition as a free man and a property owner. His faith was also a defining part of his identity. Known as a Mohammedan, the term used for Muslims during that era, Yarrow's devout practices stood out. His story offers a rare glimpse into the presence of Islam in early America, challenging the narrative that the nation's religious roots were solely Christian.
Yarrow has been noted for sobriety and cheerful conduct. He professes to be a Mohammedan and is often seen and heard in the streets singing praises to God. And conversing with him, he said, "Man is no good unless his religion comes from the heart." The acquaintances of him often banter him about eating bacon and drinking whiskey, but Yarrow says it is no good to eat hog, and drink whiskey is very bad.
Enslaved Africans did not lose their customs, their religions, their culture. They continued to, as much as they could in the confines of enslavement, to be true to who they were.
In the picture, it seems that he kept the tradition of wearing the beard, which is something distinctive to Muslim men. He has his head covered. So that's also something that's distinctive to Islamic practice.
It's kind of a knitted thing, not necessarily fully Islamic, as it were. But I think there's a kind of intentionality there. That's what's so powerful about it.
At the time, was his faith considered strange to people? How was Islam interpreted? Do we know at that time?
It depended on your level of education. It depended on your level of exposure.
But people knew that Yarrow was Muslim here in Georgetown?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Islam was a recognized religion. Educated Americans would have known that there were Muslims in West Africa. Probably also they were seeing Muslim activity in the United States.
Some of the enslaved people maintained practices that the enslavers noticed, right, made note of, and watched.
Wearing skull caps and turbans and veils, celebrating Islamic holidays, refusing pork and alcohol.
Someone like Yarrow, he seems like an anomaly, but he's not that unusual insofar as being very religious and educated.
Charles Wilson Peele's diary sheds light on the presence of Muslims like Yarrow in early America. But what captured Peele's attention most was not Yarrow's faith, it was his remarkable age. At the time, Yarrow was believed to be over 80 years old, a rare feat for someone who had endured a lifetime of enslavement and hardship.
Yarrow was supposedly 134 years old. Turns out he was sort of figuring his age by a different calendar.
Okay.
Yarrow was probably 83 in this picture. Peele was also older. He was in his late 70s, and he gave lectures in his museum about healthy lifestyle and how you would be able to reach an old age. Longevity was a theme. He had started painting older people in 1795, but there's more going on here. There's a looking that happens in this picture, from the artist to the sitter. I think he really appreciated who Yarrow was, his sort of power that he had, which I think comes across in the portrait. There's an intensity there. I mean, if you look at it, it's a beautiful picture.
Charles Wilson Peele talked about why he thinks that Yarrow had this kind of longevity. And he said it's because he believes that he wasn't drinking alcohol, that he was praying a lot. Peele was thinking about Yarrow as a Muslim enslaved man, right? And not just a Muslim enslaved man, but a devout Muslim.
Peele spent just 2 days with Yarrow, but the impression he left was profound. Through his portrait, Peele captured Yarrow not just as a former slave, but as a man of faith and resilience. The image, along with Peele's writings, ensured that Yarrow's legacy would live on.
When Yarrow died in 1823, the papers published an obituary, which Peele is thought to have written. Died Yarrow, according to his account, 136 years. It is known to all who knew him that he was industrious, honest, and moral. He was interred in the corner of his garden, the spot where he usually resorted to pray.
When Yarrow dies, there are multiple obituaries of this.
I counted so far 38 up and down the East Coast.
Wow. Of a man who was brought here as a slave.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Why was so much written about him, and why were there so many obituaries?
Well, he was 140 years old.
So they say.
So that's newsworthy.
After Yarrow's death, his son, Aquila, moved to Washington County, Maryland. Aquila's wife became a well-known midwife, and the family name is still remembered in the area. However, there is no evidence that Yarrow's descendants continued practicing his Muslim faith, a reflection of how cultural ties were often eroded over generations.
After 1865, churches from the north really descended on the south, and there was this Christianization of people. I think that for Muslims who were still living at the time, and their children and grandchildren, there was probably more of an effort to be integrated and be like everybody else.
I would see this period as a deep tragedy to enslaved Africans. Enslavers who were writing the history thought these people are without intelligence, without a soul. The assumption is that when they came, their gods died, and then they embraced Christianity. They did not acknowledge, right, did not name those traditions and those practices. And so we've spent the last, say, 50 years trying to undo that kind of historical undertaking and to really figure out who exactly were these people, because they were there, but we never really studied them or their writings or their traditions.
In recent years, the rediscovery of Yarrow's story led archaeologists to Dent Place, where they excavated the site of his former home. Guided by his obituary, which suggested he might be buried in his backyard, they sought to uncover more about his life and legacy.
His home wasn't on the site. There was an 1850s house that stood on the site that was destroyed by a hurricane. When we started the project in 2015, it was an empty lot with an extant in-ground pool.
This excavation offered a unique opportunity, a chance to perform the Janaza prayer, the Muslim funeral rites that Yarrow likely did not receive over 200 years ago. It was a poignant moment of recognition, a way to honor the faith that sustained him throughout his life.
In 2015, the Imam of Masjid Muhammad in Washington, D.C., he led the Janaza prayer for Yarrow in that same spot of the yard. And Masjid Muhammad is historically predominantly Black masjid, one of the oldest in Washington, D.C. So it's pretty profound that all these years later, that has some meaning even to the people there.
And you led the prayers?
Yes, I led the prayer. That was an honor for me. We did the janaza on the land, on his residence. We know it doesn't serve the official, but as a ceremonial to him, it would probably reach his soul.
It was a beautiful event and a way to honor Yarrow and to shed light on Muslims, their history, and their history in America.
We inherit his hopes, we inherit his dreams, and that's the connection that we feel for him. And this is the beauty of really what it means to be an American, really to embrace the excellence of the life that was here and that is here, and that shows who we are.
Today, a new house stands on Dent Place where Mamadu Yarrow once lived. However, a plaque now marks the site, commemorating his life and contributions. It serves as a powerful reminder of Yarrow and the tens of thousands of African Muslims who came to America before the nation was even founded. Mamadu Yarrow's story is one of courage and perseverance. From his beginnings in West Africa to his life as a landowner in Georgetown, he defied the odds at every turn. His legacy reminds us of the rich, complex histories that shape our understanding of early America, a history still being uncovered, with stories yet to be fully told. And that brings us to the end of Mamadu Yarrow's incredible story. His journey from captivity to success is more than just history. It's a lesson in strength and resilience. Stories like his remind us that even in the darkest times, people have the power to rise above and make a lasting impact. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay woke. See you in the next one.